What would you do if your child invited the neighborhood's most judged, most ignored person to their birthday party? What if she showed up in torn gloves and a dusty coat, while every parent stared in silence? One little boy did just that, and what happened next left the entire town speechless. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories. On the quiet end of Sycamore Street in Asheville, North Carolina, Tuesdays had a rhythm. The hum of sprinklers, the occasional bark of a dog, and at exactly 7:06 a.m., the low rumble of the garbage truck. Most folks didn't give it a second thought. But for 7-year-old Caleb Monroe, Tuesdays were his favorite. Each week, he'd climb onto the floral print armrest of the living room couch, knees tucked under his chin, and press his nose to the window. The glass always fogged with his breath. He never looked at the truck itself. He was waiting for her. Miss Evelyn Brooks. She stood on the back of the truck like a sentry-gloved hand steady as she leapt down to the curb with quiet precision. Always the same faded, duct-taped jacket clinging to her wiry frame, the same boots caked in mud, and gloves with the fingers worn through. Her gray hair peeked out from beneath a sagging beanie, twisted into tiny ropes that refused to stay hidden. She never smiled. She rarely looked up, just worked fast, invisible, efficient. To the rest of the town, Evelyn was part of the machinery, as easy to overlook as the bins she hauled. But not to Caleb. He was a curious child with soft brown eyes too big for his round face, and hair that curled like it had secrets to keep. While grown-ups tightened their lips or turned away when Evelyn passed, Caleb watched with quiet fascination. There was something about her, something he couldn't name. Not sadness exactly, not anger either, just stillness. A kind of quiet that felt like being left out of a game everyone else was playing. Once he asked his mother who she was. "That's just Miss Evelyn," Tracy said, barely glancing from her coffee. "She's been around for years, works the route, keeps to herself." But Caleb saw more than that. He noticed the way her shoulders stiffened when someone avoided her gaze. He saw how her hands trembled ever so slightly when she lifted the heavy lids. And most of all, he saw the loneliness, the kind that adults missed because they'd learned how to ignore it. He didn't know why yet. He just knew this, Miss Evelyn mattered. And somehow he knew she needed to be seen. The night before his birthday, Caleb Monroe worked in secret at the kitchen table, tongue poking from the corner of his mouth in deep concentration. He had insisted on using the good paper, the thick purple construction sheet Tracy kept for special school projects. Purple was his favorite. He thought it felt kind. With a slightly shaky hand, he wrote in big, careful letters, "You are invited to my birthday party. I saved you a chair." He used glitter glue to trace over the words, though it clumped in some places and refused to dry evenly. In the bottom right corner, he drew a stick figure, tall, with wild gray hair and a harmonica in her hands. It didn't quite look like her, but he thought she'd recognize herself. He folded the card in half and placed it under his pillow like it was something magical. The next morning, before the sun had fully climbed above the hills, Caleb was already at the front door in his Spider-Man pajamas, sneakers untied, holding the card like it was made of glass. Tracy, still brushing her teeth, called out distractedly, "Don't go past the driveway." At 7:06, right on schedule, the garbage truck groaned to a stop near the curb. Evelyn hopped down, shoulders hunched under the weight of her coat. She didn't see Caleb at first. She was dragging a heavy bin when he stepped into her path. She blinked. "You lost." Her voice was low, gravelly, the kind of voice that held back years. "No, ma'am," Caleb said, holding the card out. "This is for you." Evelyn stared at him, then the card. Slowly, she reached for it with her frayed gloves. She opened it cautiously, like it might bite. He watched her eyes trace the letters, then rest on the drawing. "I ain't got no birthday clothes," she muttered. "You don't need any. Just come," Caleb said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Before Evelyn could answer, Tracy called from the porch, "Caleb, inside now, it's too early to be outside." He turned back. "See you tomorrow," he yelled, already dashing toward the door. Evelyn looked at the card again, then at the boy, then at nothing in particular. That afternoon, Tracy mentioned the exchange to her neighbor while watering the hydrangeas. "You'll never guess who Caleb invited to his party, the garbage lady." Linda Hastings, her voice always a shade sharper than needed, nearly dropped her pruning shears. "You're joking. People like her shouldn't be around children." And just like that, the whisper had begun. The Monroe backyard was alive with summer color, sagging balloons tied to chair backs, paper streamers flapping lazily in the August breeze, and the unmistakable scent of buttercream frosting melting in the sun. Juice boxes sweated on a plastic table beside trays of cupcakes and bowls of grapes no one touched. Parents clustered in folding chairs, making polite conversation about school supplies and vacation traffic, while kids darted between a swing set and an inflatable soccer goal. Caleb was in his element, face painted like Spider-Man, chasing laughter and sunshine. But every few minutes his eyes flicked to the gate. At exactly 2:06 p.m., a soft cough broke through the noise. It was quiet, almost nothing, but Caleb heard it. He stopped mid-joke, spun around, and beamed. There she was. Miss Evelyn Brooks stood just outside the open gate, the same duct-taped jacket zipped all the way up despite the heat. Her boots were dusty, her hands clutched a crinkled plastic bag, and her harmonica peeked from a coat pocket like it had been waiting for this moment too. For a heartbeat, the party froze. A cupcake paused halfway to a mouth. A father set down his soda. Conversations thinned into whispers. Some parents instinctively reached for their phones, not to take pictures, but to look busy. Evelyn didn't move. She glanced at the crowd, then at Caleb. He didn't hesitate. With frosting still on his fingers, he bolted across the yard and threw his arms around her waist. His head barely reached her ribs. "You came," he grinned, face buried in her coat. Her hands hovered in the air for a second before settling gently on his back. "Told you maybe," she said softly. "I saved your chair. It's got your name on it." He tugged her hand and pulled her toward the kids' table, where a small white plastic chair stood beside his own. Taped to the back was a paper plate with the words Miss Evelyn written in bold purple marker. Glitter glue sparkled faintly in the sun. Evelyn sat down slowly, placing the bag in her lap. Caleb plopped beside her and launched into a story about a superhero who could talk to animals. He gestured wildly, crumbs flying, while she nodded, smiling in that quiet, closed-mouth way that made it feel like she was listening to something sacred. Nearby, a group of kids giggled. "She smells like old milk," one girl whispered. A boy snorted. Another covered his nose. Parents shifted in their seats. A few glanced toward Tracy Monroe, who stood stiffly near the cooler, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. But Caleb didn't hear them, or maybe he did and chose not to care. All he knew was that his guest had arrived, and as far as he was concerned, this party had just truly begun. For a while, the party carried on as if nothing was unusual. Kids ran past Evelyn without much thought. A few parents made a show of chatting a little louder, as if volume could drown out discomfort. But Caleb stayed right by her side, telling her about his favorite video game, about how he once tried to fly by jumping off the porch with a cape, about a dream he had where his harmonica turned into a time machine. Evelyn chuckled softly now and then, eyes warm, but distant, like she wasn't fully used to being part of something again. She had just taken a tentative bite of a store-bought cupcake when a voice cut through the hum of conversation. "Excuse me," someone said. Evelyn looked up. A woman in her mid-30s stood near the table, holding a half-empty plate of potato salad. She had light brown hair pinned into a neat bun, wore tidy sandals, and had the kind of posture that came from years of professionalism. Didn't you used to teach music at Ridgeview Elementary? The question hung in the air. Evelyn blinked. Her fingers tightened ever so slightly around the harmonica resting on her knee. Yes, she said finally, her voice steady but quiet. Room 8, music every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The woman's face lit with recognition. I knew it, I'm April. April Jensen. You taught me to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on a xylophone. I remember your ladybug earrings. A few nearby parents turned toward them, curious now. Something in the air shifted, less suspicion, more interest. April stepped closer, brows furrowing slightly. What happened? I mean, why are you? Evelyn exhaled slowly and sat up a little straighter. I was a teacher for 17 years. Loved every minute of it. I made up songs to help kids remember their times tables. Ran a choir that sang at the town fair. She paused, eyes scanning the yard, not accusing, just remembering. Then I found out our principal was moving money from the school music fund. I reported it, thought I was doing the right thing. April's face tightened. What happened? Retaliation, Evelyn said simply. No formal charges, just no contract renewal. No school wanted to hire someone who made waves. Word gets around in a small district. There was no bitterness in her voice, only fact. My husband didn't understand, said I should have kept quiet. He left a year later, bills piled up. I lost the house. Ended up in that RV by the old mill. Took the first job I could get that didn't care where I came from or who I used to be. She reached into her coat pocket and ran her thumb along the edge of the harmonica. At least this job's honest, she murmured. A heavy silence settled. Then Caleb, still seated beside her, looked up with wide eyes. That's not fair. Evelyn smiled gently and rested a hand on his shoulder. Life's not always fair, baby, but we can still choose to be kind. And for the first time that day, some of the parents looked at her, really looked, as if seeing someone they'd never noticed before. The laughter had returned gradually, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Conversations swelled again. Parents relaxed. Someone turned on a Bluetooth speaker, and pop music hummed under the buzz of the party. But not everyone had softened. By the drink table, a lanky boy about 10 with a mischievous glint in his eye filled a red plastic cup to the brim with orange soda. He glanced toward the kids' table, where Evelyn still sat beside Caleb, gently dabbing frosting from his cheek with a napkin. The boy strolled over, too casually. He passed behind Evelyn, then made an exaggerated stumble. Oops, he smirked, tilting the cup just slightly, just enough for the threat to hang in the air. Before the first drop could fall, Caleb sprang to his feet. He planted himself between the boy and Evelyn, his small frame braced like a shield. She's my guest, he said loudly, his voice shaking only slightly. If you can't be kind, go home. The yard fell silent again, but this time the silence had weight. The boy blinked, surprised. His smirk faltered. Eyes darted around, but no one laughed with him. No backup came. He turned, mumbled something under his breath, and walked away. Evelyn touched Caleb's arm lightly. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did, he replied without looking at her. A moment passed. Then Evelyn reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the small silver harmonica and lifted it to her lips. She closed her eyes. The first soft notes of Somewhere Over the Rainbow floated through the air, thin and trembling at first, then fuller, steadier. Children stopped mid-run. Even the Bluetooth speaker was silenced by a quiet click. The melody curved gently above the grass and balloons, sweet and aching. By the time she finished, even the wind seemed to pause. A little girl in a yellow sundress walked up, holding a sticky cupcake in one hand. Can you teach me how to play that? She asked shyly. Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled. I'd be honored. That was all it took. April Jensen stepped forward, balancing her plate in one hand. Miss Evelyn, she said warmly. "We have career day next month at Ridgeview. The kids would love to hear your story. Would you consider coming?" A father who'd stayed silent earlier now offered a cold water bottle. Another mom set a bowl of watermelon near her elbow. One of the dads even asked about her time teaching choir. The change wasn't loud or dramatic. It was slow, real. For the first time in years, Evelyn wasn't a shadow at the edge of the neighborhood. She was part of the table. The sky over Asheville blushed pink as the sun sank behind the trees, casting long shadows over the weathered rooftops. In the lot beside the old textile mill, Miss Evelyn Brooks sat on the steps of her rusted RV, a chipped mug of tea in one hand and something far more fragile in the other. It was a form. Crisp once, now slightly yellowed around the edges, its creases worn soft from being folded and unfolded 100 times. It was a reinstatement application, the same one she had requested over a decade ago, never quite brave enough to fill out. Until now. With a breath that trembled just slightly, Evelyn set her tea aside and smoothed the paper on her lap. Her pen moved slowly, deliberately, across each blank space. Name. Address. Years of service. Former school district. Her hand hesitated once at reason for separation, then continued. No embellishment, no excuses, just the truth. She placed the completed form into an envelope, sealed it, and stared at it a moment longer before walking it to the mailbox at the corner of the lot. The red flag clicked upright with a satisfying thump. She didn't tell anyone, not Felix, her work partner, not April, not even Caleb. She waited in silence, the kind of silence that no longer felt like loneliness, only patience. Exactly 1 week later, the letter came. White envelope. Thin, but not empty. Black print on official paper. "We are pleased to inform you that your application for substitute teaching has been approved, pending fingerprint clearance and orientation scheduling." Evelyn read the letter 3 times, lips moving silently. Then she folded it carefully and slid it under her pillow like something sacred, as if she feared it might vanish by morning. That Saturday, she rose early, warmed a homemade peach pie, wrapped it in foil, and walked the 3 blocks to the Monroe house. Tracy answered the door, surprised. "Miss Evelyn." "I hope it's all right," Evelyn said, lifting the pie. "It's not fancy." Tracy smiled and stepped aside. "Come in. Caleb's in the back." When he saw her, Caleb's eyes lit up like someone had turned on every light in his chest. "Miss Evelyn," he yelled, running to her. She knelt to meet him, the pie still warm in her hands. "I've got something to tell you," she said softly. "You just might see me at your school sometime soon." His mouth dropped open. "You mean it?" She nodded. "Just a few days a week, maybe, but yeah, I think it's time." Caleb wrapped his arms around her and held on tight. "I always saw you," he whispered, "even when others didn't." From the kitchen doorway, Tracy watched them, her eyes softer than they'd ever been. Not cautious, not polite, proud. Later that night, as the house quieted and the evening settled into memory, Evelyn walked home with the warmth of something sweeter than pie resting in her chest.